Well, hello everybody. My name's Peter Biggers. For my sins, I've worked most of my life in local authorities, in planning, mainly in planning policy. I set up Argyll Planning Consultancy in 2010, and since then, really, I've been doing quite a bit of work on neighbourhood planning, both as a plan coordinator for Alnwick, my hometown, and that's what I'm going to touch on today, but also as a neighbourhood plan examiner. So I see the finished effect and output of all this process. So I just want to talk, I've really entitled this sort of Empowering Communities and really made that the focus. So I just wanted to talk about, first of all, the sort of context that sits in. What a community might expect in terms of the outcomes out of that, and then look at a series of challenges. And you can see though there what I'm proposing to cover. I don't think there'll be any surprises in the list for all of you looking at how communities can respond. So just the context, first of all, and I stress this is the theory. So at the start we've got localism, the ethos that's behind neighbourhood planning. So what does that mean? Well, it means trying to do everything at the lowest possible level, that the neighbourhood should decide what the plan contains, and not the local planning authority. Community planning is probably both what we're trying to achieve and also the tool for a successful neighbourhood plan. So where people, neighbourhoods, communities have the power and responsibility and use that to create better communities. Decentralisation is also how we do it, and giving power to individuals, professionals, communities and local institutions. So I stress that is the theory behind what we should be trying to achieve. In terms of the outcomes that you might get out of a process of neighbourhood planning, you should be able to get community buy-in, taking responsibility for planning at a more local level. And just in terms of the Alnwick experience, I'll just, as I run through this, I'll say where I thought we did all right and where I thought we didn't. I think probably we kind of improved community buy-in in the plan. I should say the plan has been through examination. It's just about to go to referendum, so it's effectively finished. And I'll talk a bit about the problems of that stage in a minute. High rates of participation. We had quite high rates at the beginning of the process, quite a lot of interest. As time's gone on, people have their interest has sort of withered on the vine, as it were. Not entirely. So I'd say we sort of, those first two we sort of did all right to a degree on. New volunteers and community groups and renewed interest in community well-being. Well, yes, again at the start, quite good. We had quite a powerful steering group set up, well represented. That similarly over time has shrunk to a sort of core, and that may be partly to do with the time it's taken to produce the plan. Locally based decision making, I'd say probably yes. In terms of just looking at the neighbourhood plan project, that was, of those outcomes, probably the best that we've achieved, but still challenges over that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. New projects and services taken on by the community, yes, quite strongly. The plan has resulted in, sitting alongside the neighbourhood plan, a community, what they've called a community action plan of local community-based projects that the town council wants to take on behalf of the community. And dialogue with local authorities and service providers, I'd say the local authorities, yes, we've had a good relationship with Northumberland. Service providers, ish to a degree. So if we move forward to look at what I think are the challenges towards empowerment, the first one, central standards and rules. It was supposed to be light touch neighbourhood planning, and I think the controls and the processes that have been put in place kind of negate that, and it's a story we've seen time and time again in planning. I'm old enough to know to have seen a lot of the rethinking the government's done over planning, and what appears as a good idea at the start is then twisted, or in an effort to get a sort of consistent approach, it's become over-regulated, and the strain tells through that process. And I think, as with any planning initiative, the Localism Act and neighbourhood planning, I think genuinely, well, I still do think genuinely is a good idea. I just think there are problems with some of the processes that we put in place to ensure a consistency, and that's partly that that comes at a cost. To get that statutory weight, I fully accept the plan has got to be robust, but that is where you start to get tension with the community and what they want to do. If the plan's got to comply with this and with the local plan, it becomes a problem. I think the technical complexity then comes out of that, and I think one of the issues is arising out of that is that most QB is qualifying body. Most qualifying bodies, so forums or councils, have engaged at some stage in the process professional assistance, and that has an issue because there is then a perception of is this plan ours, or are we being manipulated into producing something that is no longer ours? I think where the help is enabling and facilitating and tools and resources, I think that is the way ahead, because groups do need that. I was talking to Sebastian on our table there about that, and I think where that is the role of the professional support, I think that's fine and it works. Also, I think where the local planning authority has adopted a responsible mentoring role and sees itself as a mentoring process, I think the challenge of central standards and the technical side of plans is much less of an issue. Yeah. Community capacity, big one. This, and I know John Sterzaker is going to follow me. He's going to talk in some detail about capacity. So I'm just going to set the scene and rush on. We've got in neighbourhood planning, we've got a very definite urban-rural split. There are far more neighbourhood plans being carried out in the rural areas than the inner urban areas, and I know John's going to look at some of the reasons behind that. Rich versus poor. The well-heeled communities concerned about their property investment are much more likely to get involved, and Keith was talking about NIMBYism. I think that is there as a danger. I think the process, I think that's possibly where the process does start to help. The process of going through examination and the fact that neighbourhood plans are about facilitating development and change, not stopping it. So a plan shouldn't get through the examination stage that is blatantly NIMBYism. So there is that counterbalance at the end of the process. But a lot of communities do start from the premise, let's control what's hitherto been uncontrolled. So those top two really, we have a sort of emphasis at the moment from the likes of locality to try and establish support systems, encourage neighbourhood planning in those communities. But even in communities that feel more empowered because they arguably have the capacity, is still an issue. how do we find new volunteers and sustain that interest? ANIC, although it's not a disadvantaged area by any means, it has got some pockets of deprivation within it. But even within that context, we've struggled to hold volunteers and to sustain the community interest as we've gone through the process. Representativeness of qualifying bodies. Parish and town councils are the lower tier council. They represent community interests. We vote them in. Well, some of us do anyway. But there is, in many places, a democratic deficit. So the question really is, are they the right group to be qualifying body in most neighbourhood plans? It's difficult to see an alternative. I would say that what we need to do really is to ensure that they, qualifying bodies, set up a really representative project steering group. I've seen a lot of neighbourhood plans where the steering group is effectively parish councillors, not any wider than that, and when you suggest to them, it's something that they don't even seem to have thought about. Well, could we have the head teacher from the school? Could we have the village shopkeeper? Could we have etc., etc.? Those kind of wider steering groups work well. And in ANIC we did try to do that, and I think in truth we did have a reasonably good spread of representatives from the community working regularly on the project. It's probably true to say that neighbourhood forums, although they have got their own difficulties in terms of setting them up, probably have the potential to be more representative. Lethargy and disinterest. Well, anyone who's worked on any sort of community planning at some point will have come across this, and it's, I think, the most difficult thing to do, partly because, not because there aren't good ideas there, but mainly, I think, because of going back to the issue of capacity, time, financial resources to do it. But really, I think what you have to try and do is start from the sort of pivot point or focus point of understanding the community you're working with, and then try to find common objectives that bind that and can be used in the neighbourhood planning project. I think ANIC did all right on those first two. Bring together people in new and fun ways. We tried. I don't think we were particularly successful, but I think it did come back down to the amount of time to set it up. We had a lot of this sort of thing, sort of interactive workshops, getting hands dirty, working around maps, chatting, doing those sort of community planning type exercises. But I wouldn't say we were terribly innovative at that stage. Involve the many, not just the few. Well, we did try to do that, and we're relatively successful, I think, in the first in the early days. Not so much lately. We did have good involvement at the key sort of consultation stages, but. In terms of and we did some analysis about spatial representation within the neighbourhood and the town that covered, and there was a reasonable spread, but as you would expect, perhaps not as strongly in the more disadvantaged areas of the town. Be sure you're being representative. Well, we've talked about that, and I think those two work strongly together, and in terms of the project group, we did achieve a good coverage. Realistic but aspirational. These are tensions, I think. if you're going to hold the interest of the community, you need to make sure that what you're producing as the neighbourhood plan is relevant to them, is resolving problems and issues that they have. Not all communities will need a neighbourhood plan, not necessarily the right vehicle for them. I think we, as ANIC, in terms of ANIC's project, we probably were over-ambitious. Whether it's a very comprehensive plan, for those that have seen it, whether we'll fail or not, I don't know. I hope not. As I mentioned earlier, what we did, sitting alongside the statutory, what will be the statutory neighbourhood plan, we've got this community action plan, which is plugged, the actions of which are plugged into the policies of the neighbourhood plan. And the town council hitherto is very up for taking that action plan forward. They've appointed an extra officer, so they're starting things, work on a housing needs study, etc. That's already started. So they seem at this stage quite serious about taking those community actions forward. And we as we started the process, we made a pledge to people in ANIC when we were asking about what issues concerned them. Not all of them, we could see from the start, not all of them were planning neighbourhood plan matters, or matters that the neighbourhood plan could do anything about. But they were issues of concern to them, and we said, well, we want to honour that. The neighbourhood plan is limited in what it can do, but we're going to construct this community action plan sitting alongside it so that we can pick up some of those community planning concerns that didn't sit very comfortably in the neighbourhood plan. Maintaining local control is another challenge, and I think as you get further into the process, towards the end of the process, there are really three main challenges that can derail the whole process and seriously undermine empowerment. First one, which ANIC has suffered, is the examination. We went to great lengths with both planning aid volunteers, with county council planners, with myself, to ensure that the policies that went into the plan were robust. The examiner came along, and I accept there were a lot of policies. He has recommended deleting 20 odd policies. So what kind of message does that send to the community and the volunteers that have been working on that plan for a significant number of years? Not good. The second one is that developers, and Keith was talking about the Turley study, Turley highlighted this. Developers, if they haven't been involved or feel they haven't been involved properly in the process, i.e. their preferred site isn't included in the plan, will try and jump the gun, and that's happened time and again. They'll put an application in. If it's refused, they'll appeal it on the basis of, or hiding behind the fact that prematurity in advance of either local plans or neighbourhood plans is not a very strong defence. And that, if it's a significant site, can derail your project. The Morpeth neighbourhood plan saw that from an early stage, where there's a number of developers fighting over the outskirts of Morpeth, and that really has skewed what's happened there. And the last challenge that can derail you is legal challenge on procedural grounds. There's been a lot of that, particularly linked to developers. If they think, particularly on housing land supply, they're not being listened, the neighbourhood plan is not giving proper weight to that issue. We've seen legal challenge on those grounds, and they can all derail the process. I've called this last slide the planning churn. Those of you who've worked in planning long enough will know that things do churn. We see ideas that have been around before coming back. The government is never far away from tinkering with planning. We've got the MPPF review. More criticisms that we had way back in the days of Michael Heseltine of jobs in filing cabinets, for those that can remember that far back. Planning the bad boy, slowing economic recovery. The sort of focus, particularly in the southeast, of trying to build the housing provision levels up. Affordable housing, well, a lot of that is mainstream meat to a lot of neighbourhood plans. They're really struggling to come to terms with how do we secure affordable housing and how do we make sure it is available for locals. There's been coverage of the St Ives policies recently about that. Well, I would say in terms of where we're going with starter homes, and the whole emphasis being forced to switch to that is taking it away from affordable housing and the wider aspects of that. And for those that have green belt, communities that have green belt, it's quite worrying in terms of, for them probably, of what is happening with the green belt. So I just finished by saying, what price localism now? And I don't mean what I've said to be negative in any way, because as I said, I still, as a professional, I still firmly believe neighbourhood planning is a good tool, and it is a way of empowering communities. But as you can see from those challenges, there is a lot of areas for problems to develop, and the need for us to adjust the process. I think particularly where the qualifying body hands over the plan to the local planning authority and submits it. That's it as far as they're concerned. They've got no more influence, and certainly what's happened in Alnwick with the examination. We're extremely fortunate that Northumberland County have continued to discuss the examiner's report with us and ways that we can find through that before they reach a decision. A lot of authorities just wouldn't do that. It's once it's submitted, that's it. And I think that's where the process is not right in terms of empowering communities.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Peter. Well, I think I'm going to leave any questions again to the last part, and I'm going to invite our next speaker, John Sterziker, so that we have a decent coffee time.